Hi, John. How are you today?
I'm good, Elliot. It's 90 degrees here in Northern Virginia after being in the 60s a couple days ago. I'm sure you guys are getting variations of changes in weather as well.
We are. It was in the upper 70s yesterday. Today it's in the upper 60s. We've had a lot of rainstorms come through. I think we're supposed to get some more later today, but it's nice to be out of the 30s. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
the 1930s. Oh, no, wait, that's something
Yeah,
else.
that too.
Yeah. All right, so I don't even remember what week this is in terms of the war, but we're still doing that. We're apparently closing the strait, opening the strait. We'll leave that international security issues unrelated to AML to everybody else out there, but obviously that's going on. But I do want to mention something that occurred over the weekend that's very relevant to the anti-corruption space, and that's the results of the Hungarian election. As everybody knows by now, Orban lost, and he lost big. Probably why he conceded, because there was no chance if anybody thought he wasn't going to either leave office or challenge the result. What's really fascinating is his opponent, Peter Magyar, is not any particular progressive. He's more of a center right, but he wanted to reverse all of the corruption issues that many have claimed have occurred in the past 16 years. So I think that's good news for a country that held democratic elections, that they finally got fed up. It wasn't just corruption, but obviously they were targeting journalists, targeting universities. Some of this I realize is sounding familiar, but the bottom line is people came out and they voted in large quantities. And then more importantly, tremendous significance for Ukraine, because Magyar has already said that Hungary will no longer act as a Russian puppet. He's no longer blocking EU aid to Ukraine and sanctions on Russia. I think that's good news for our colleagues in Ukraine that must be feeling better about this given what happened. So, anyway, I think because of the anti corruption claim that he had, that's really important. And so I thought we would start with that.
Agreed. We talk a lot about the impact of global corruption on the rule of law, but also on creating environments that are fertile for financial crime, money laundering, fraud. So I think this was a really good sign. There are many commentators who are talking about whether this will be an anomaly or whether this might be the beginning of a trend back the other way, away from some of the less democratic leaders that we've seen elected in parts of Europe and other parts of the world. So where would you like to go from there, John?
On the good news portion of our conversation, wanted to mention when we talked about this before, but the IRS CI new chief is now officially in role, and that's Jared Koopman, who has been with IRS for 26 years, done quite a bit. He's presented on cyber and related topics to the private sector. We were able to meet him at our forum last month. Congratulations to Jared, and I know that IRS CI is in good hands with his oversight.
Yes, and he spoke very positively about the value of public-private partnerships at the forum. And I think that experience we've had with IRS CI will continue under his leadership. And I too wish him well in his new role.
Just a couple other quick things. OFAC, Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control, has announced that they'd sanctioned 6 targets involved in money laundering, cash smuggling, enterprise operated by Cartel del Noreste, one of Mexico's most violent drug trafficking organizations. That group, CDN, is a U.S. designated FTO, a foreign terrorist organization, that, according to the note here, exerts significant influence along the U.S.-Mexico border near Laredo, Texas. Wanted to mention that OFAC has sanctioned the casinos there and key associates.
And FinCEN put out updated FAQs for the geographic targeting orders related to the Minneapolis area. So for those of you who are tracking that, you should take a look at those.
One quick thing about those FAQs, in case you wonder what the penalties are, the FAQs say that if a business willfully violates the GTO, and also any partner director who willfully participates, could be liable for the following civil and criminal penalties. The civil penalties are the greater of either $71,545 or the amount involved in the transaction up to $286,184. And a separate penalty may be applied for each violation. Not sure how they came up with those numbers, but that's what's there. The criminal penalties is a fine of not more than $250,000 and or imprisonment for not more than 5 years. And that's based on an announcement back in January of 2026.
We saw also that DFS in New York is partnering in a program with the New York State Police to crack down on insurance fraud. And the particular focus is they've had a significant uptick in staged accidents and then people making insurance claims being paid out and then the money going to the bad actors. It's an ongoing program, but they recently hosted a specialized training for 250 investigators, troopers, and personnel from local law enforcement agencies to help detect and prosecute these financial crimes. You and I talk about a lot of different financial crime. I don't know that we've talked much about insurance fraud, but it's been a problem for many years in many forms. This apparently has truly gotten out of hand, and it was interesting to see that the financial regulators and the traditional police in New York were getting together about something like this.
Hey, just real quick, I know we're talking about this at the end. We have a webinar coming up next week that's going to deal with elder abuse and other frauds like sextortion. A former guest of ours and well-known in the technology and AML space, Allison Jimenez. You should follow her on LinkedIn. And she's with Dynamic Securities Analytics. She published some statistics from some reporting regarding teen sextortion victim. Obviously, some analysis in there as well. I won't go through it all, but when you get a chance, if that's an area you're focused on or interested in, take a look at that. But again, that's something posted by Allison Jimenez from Dynamic Securities Analytics.
And you and I saw an interesting report. I guess they're reporting a rumor at this point because it has not been confirmed by any governmental agency, but apparently the Secretary of the Treasury stated at a semi-public dinner that the White House is working on an executive order that would require banks in the United States to collect citizenship information. There is no executive order that's been issued. The White House, some months ago, when this rumor first started circulating, denied that anything was happening. But apparently, based on the secretary's comments, the plan would require banks to ask customers to present a document, such as a passport or a birth certificate, to verify citizenship, in addition to the current standard documents for opening an account. I think there's a couple interesting things. First, if it in fact happens, if it would be retroactive, banks would have to talk to all their existing customers and gather this information, and that is a huge lift. Secondly, and a passport isn't the only document you could use, but there are about 183 million US passports in circulation as of the end of 2025. We have a population of about 340 million people. Now, not every one of those 340 million people has a bank account, admittedly, but it's interesting. There's quite the gap between people carrying passports in the US and total citizenship. The other thing that's interesting for those of you who've been around for a while, you'll remember that there have been many discussions in the United States, certainly I would say beginning back around the Reagan administration and coming forward, about the idea of some kind of national ID card. It has never been enacted, in part because privacy advocates along the political spectrum and others have felt that it was intrusive. We have a version of it with real ID on driver's licenses, but again, everyone will recall that it took a long time for that to get implemented. There were several delays, some of them related to the challenges of going into motor vehicle departments during the pandemic, but some of them just everybody figuring out how to do it. So we'll see if this executive order actually comes out. I guess the last thing I would comment, and John, I know this is an issue that's near and dear to your heart, is given all the things that we've seen come out recently about under the guise of debanking. I think it's interesting now. We may be creating, if this would happen, we could create a new group of people who get debanked, and that's people who can't, not that they're not citizens, but may not have the proper documentation to prove that they're citizens.
You know, the article quotes from two folks. One is Jeremy Kress, who's an associate professor of business law at the University of Michigan. He said that the plan was, quote, a way to weaponize the banking system to achieve political ends, unquote. And I got to read this one. The financial service lobbyist, he or she, his name is not disclosed, said the following, quote, the admin might think this is a good idea until Joe MAGA in Alabama is asked to present his papers, unquote. So we'll see how this turns out.
Again, it could just be a rumor, but there was reasonably explicit description of the where and the when of the Treasury Secretary's comments in this dinner. Did you see the thing about the surge in money laundering cases that are being dealt with by the courts in Turkey?
No, why don't you go ahead? And I do have one more thing.
Okay, at the end of 2025, the courts in Turkey had dealt with over 12,600 money laundering cases involving about 18,000 defendants and about 28,000 underlying offenses. That's a significant increase. So, for example, at the end of 2024, the number of cases for that year was just over 5,000. And here's why I think this is interesting. The rise in cases follows increased scrutiny of Turkey's AML framework. FATF put Turkey on the gray list in 2021, and this was over deficiencies in tracking money laundering and terrorist financing. It exited the list in 2024, and now in 2025, under an updated regime that was more aligned with FATF's recommendations and international norms, now we're seeing actual cases moving through the system as a result of that change in framework. So I think that's interesting. I can't say one set of events proves the value of FATF, but there is a clear through line here, and I think that's good for those of us who feel like the FATF process has great value.
The OCCRP, in their weekly newsletter, and it's free, so you should subscribe. One of their major stories is the Ukrainian anti-corruption agencies have wrapped up their investigation into a prominent but thus far unnamed member of parliament suspected of orchestrating a vote buying scheme, clearing the way for the case to go to trial. And the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office claimed that the lawmaker attempted to establish an official but semi-formalized bribery network within the legislature from December of last year, under which lawmakers would receive money for voting or abstaining as instructed. The reason to read that is because obviously there's been many claims about corruption in Ukraine from Putin and others. Clearly, not just from this example, but there's been extensive work done over the course of a number of years to attack corruption systems and issues. And this is just another example of that.
The last thing I have is the FCA in the UK. They've done a research study, and the output of that is highlighting good and poor practices in the CDD area. The review examines CDD and EDD and ongoing monitoring across a range of firms. And some of the weaknesses they found were organizations where the review cycles were not detailed enough to know how often the periodic reviews should be taking place, the lack of clarity over what they should do if an event-driven review happens, so an off-cycle review, and that there isn't sufficient clarity to specify when senior management approval is needed. Also, a number of the organizations they looked at failed to produce any evidence of what EDD measures had been taken and recorded. Classic example of what we all talk about, which is if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. And it's interesting. It's worth a look, I think, whether you're in the UK or not, but particularly in the UK, and just to take a look at your own processes and procedures and be sure that even if you're doing it well, that it's documented well.
That's it on my end. In terms of programming coming up, I had a very fun and interesting interview with Paul Camacho, who is with a a major casino on the West Coast. And he talks a lot about the gaming industry and AML, and that'll come up in the next week or so. As we mentioned, we have a webinar coming up on the 23rd to deal with elder abuse, sextortion, and related crimes. Still plenty of time to sign up for that. Elliot, I know you're going to go on a well-deserved vacation, so we're going to wish you well. Anything else you want to mention before you sign off?
As just one more detail, the webinar on the 23rd will live stream at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And as you mentioned, you can still sign up at our website. Yes, I'm going to be on a very interesting trip/vacation with a large part of my wife's family related to their mother, my mother-in-law, escaping the Nazi regime in 1939. She grew up in Germany with her parents. So it's going to be quite fascinating. I'm leaving you in good hands with our colleague Joe McNamara for next week. And I know you'll do great. And I'll listen to it on the plane home.
Hopefully you'll have other things to listen to as well. But we'll try to make it as interesting as possible.
Thank you very much. All right, John, you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.